We're turning our attention now to the aviation industry, but we're talking more about airlines operations management today. There's quite a lot to chew on with regards what's going on in the industry, and there's been a lot of talk about what best should be done at this time, as all of these issues are coming up, preferring solutions and the best ways to achieve it in line with global best practices, and of course in line with what is needed to make sure that this very key sector of the economy does not die. I'm being joined on the program now by Captain Dung. He is the former chairman, governing council of the Nigeria Aviation Safety Initiative, which is a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization. He's also a pilot and an aircraft maintenance engineer and a safety advocate with 29 years of experience in the aviation industry. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining me on the program.
Good morning, Herod. My pleasure.
So, what for you are the key issues that domestic airline carriers face in terms of operations, management, and services?
The key issues is generally inefficiency, poor corporate governance. But I would say the foundation for that defect or deficiency is planning and implementation of that plan. And if I can make a point, before an airline starts to even apply for its license, process usually takes about 6 to 18 months, depending on how ready the airlines are. One key factor there, requirement, is a comprehensive business plan. The business plan should also indicate how the airline intends to run for at least 90 days without having 1 penny inflow of capital. It's a requirement. Financials for at least 3 years. Plans for route development and profitability. These are parts that must be in the plan. You submit that plan before you are even considered. The process for getting a license to operate as a commercial carrier is a 5-step process. The first one is called pre-application phase, which means you have not even applied. It's a discussion with the regulator, which is great because it gives direction to the potential investor. So at this time, you would be fully aware of that business plan. Now, one key factor in the business plan as well is maintenance reserve. You have to prove and show evidence that you have got the funds to sustain the operation. And the reason why they want this maintenance reserve to be sort of sacrosanct is what you keep towards your scheduled heavy maintenance, popularly called C-check. Because if you take out an aircraft for the C-check, which should take between 2 weeks to a month, depending on how much work needs to be done.
Who's responsible for these checks?
Person responsible
which
for the check.
Yes, which regulator is responsible? Because once the company comes with a business plan,
yes,
with clear documentation of what they intend to achieve and how they intend to manage operations for 90 days, you said?
Initial 90 days without 1 penny. So they assume you start flying and not one single passenger boards your flight. For 3 months, you must have funds to run the entire operation, pay all your staff for 90 days.
So who does this check to make sure that this particular airline or airlines that have come on board actually stay true to this plan?
The organization or the entity responsible for this is the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, NCAA. That is the regulator of the industry. And there is a regulation which they also must adhere to. It is Part 18 of the 20-point regulatory framework we have, the NCARs, or the Nigerian Civil Aviation Regulations. They are technically 19. They skipped 13, number 13 there, so they are 19. And this is Part 18, called Economic Regulation.
So what happens after 90 days?
After 90 days, they're expecting that at least people will have learnt about the airline, seen you flying, and then bought your tickets. Hopefully you had a marketing plan in place, which is part of the business plan, and a commercial department that will show you how to make money. Secondly, you must have done surveys to know that there's a market there and how you intend to break into it, because there are other airlines flying. Currently, there are about 18 airlines applying for license to fly. So they must show how they intend to come into this market that is, well, not heavily dominated yet, but you're chasing few customers in a recession. So you must have a plan of how you think you can break into that market.
So why does it seem that we have these issues with regard to some of the airlines not being able to take care of their debts
Yes.
either to banks or to the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, for instance, or to even other corporate organizations? Why do we have mounting debts from some of these commercial airlines?
On one part, I would say it as a result of poor oversight, economic oversight. But I will have to make this point. It is not good for our image, but it is known that in this country we have some sort of a client-patron relationship, not just in politics, but in business as well. You prop up your cronies, give them waivers, and they get away with a lot of things. So that is one of the major reasons we have to tackle. In other words, corruption, subversion of due processes. And sometimes that can be protracted until something happens. The good thing I'll have to say here again is that the government has been a bit proactive by forming AMCON, which is more or less like an appendage of a central bank. And that was actually a statutory body that was formed by an act of parliament. So it's not just a little company here. And the main reason for that is to ensure economic development continues in some critical areas, especially oil and gas, energy, and aviation. And so you will see that most of the companies that have been bailed out are either in the energy sector or in aviation, airlines. So what government tried to do is to say, well, despite the fact that we have all of these safeguards, let's put one more, just in case these airlines get into trouble with the banks to stop the financial system and the economy from collapsing. We'll make sure that the banks don't fall because they have given credit to oil and gas and airlines. So AMCON came in to act as a second buffer to protect airlines from going bankrupt, despite the mismanagement or not so predictive management.
So would you say that that's what's also responsible for the high mortality rates in the domestic aviation business, not being able to have good corporate governance, for instance, not having proper management of their financials, and maybe issues with management as a whole?
We also have another problem, and if you observe, most of the airlines are owned by either families or single individuals.
How is that a problem?
Cabo Air. Oh, this is where it is a problem. You employ your managers and call him an MD, and you tell him you want to take a football team to go somewhere, and he says, no, we have a schedule. We are taking passengers from Lagos, Abuja with all the aircraft. We have a schedule for that. And you say, no, I want you to do this. And the manager says, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And you say, you're fired. And so you tell the deputy MD and say, I want this aircraft to do this. You are now the MD. People are afraid of losing their jobs. And sometimes they kowtow to this sort of sole proprietor kind of business that we have. Or if it is a group of investors with very marginal shares, the dominant partner more or less hijacks the control from the technocrats within the organization, and then you see good organizations taking very bad decisions. One thing I must say with regards to ARIG actually had a fantastic organizational setup. That is confirmed. It was properly set up. Checks, balances, how things should work. So it will have been the model airline for Nigeria. And of course, you know, they went regional, they're going international. They had almost everything going for them. That will have been, and of course, it is a flag carrier. Medvi also is a flag carrier because it flies on behalf of Nigeria to overseas. So these two airlines have, you know, what you would say, pedigree to be able to succeed. Unfortunately, where we are now is with regards to ARIG, of course, mounting debts, profiles, and so on and so forth. And now it is for in the hands of a receiver. But the receiver not to liquidate, but to restructure and set it back on profitability. We cannot afford to have a disruption of 55% of our aviation system because ARIG more or less is the dominant carrier in the whole of West Africa. And for Nigeria, about 55% of the traffic that we have.